So it's been a very long time since I reviewed a gaming monitor, but in this video, I'm actually going to talk about the Sony INZONE M10S. It is a 27-inch Quad HD OLED monitor with a 480Hz refresh rate, and even though it came out a couple of months ago, I haven't had a chance to review it just yet. So let's change that and let's see how this monitor performs when it comes to response times, latency, color reproduction, and so on. And most importantly, let's see if this Sony monitor is worth getting or not. Let's begin. One of the best features of this monitor is its design, and I don't really remember ever seeing a monitor that had a better stand than this one. It is minimalistic, it is thin and super compact, but it is also exceptionally well built and sturdy. And at first glance, you might think that the base is just way too small and the whole thing just might topple over, but it is actually perfectly balanced and it is more stable than most models with larger stand designs. It doesn't have any unnecessary gamer aesthetic, it doesn't have any RGB lights, it is just functional without taking up a lot of desk space and without interfering with your keyboard or your mouse. And yes, I know that it is very odd to pay so much attention to a stand, but it is quite rare to see a stand that really stands out, and I would really like to see more designs like this one. And if this is not your thing and you don't really like it, you can always VESA mount this monitor instead. It is height adjustable, you can tilt it and you can swivel it the full 360 degrees, but you cannot rotate it 90 degrees, which is not something that most people would do with a 480Hz OLED monitor. It comes with a very simple form of cable management, but it works, and you get one DisplayPort 2.1 and two HDMI 2.1 connections on the back. They are all limited to 40 gigabits per second, which is enough for 1440p 480Hz, but using DSC. You get a USB hub and a 3.5mm jack, but there are no speakers built in. Now, Sony's OSD is pretty okay as well. It is nice and clean and intuitive, and also very easy to use thanks to a little joystick on the back. But if you prefer to use your keyboard and mouse, you can also install the software package and control the settings in that way. Now, most features that I look for are included, like an sRGB profile, multiple HDR modes, and the option to update the firmware yourself, and you get a couple of gamer-specific options like crosshairs and a 24-inch esports mode that you can set to either the middle or the bottom of your screen and simulate a smaller monitor for your esports games. Now, I think that a 27-inch 1440p monitor already offers a very nice balance for competitive titles, but it is an extra option that some of you might enjoy. They also added two game modes specifically for FPS games, FPS Pro and FPS Pro Plus, and these settings should improve visibility in certain games, but I'm going to talk about what they exactly do when we get to the graphs. This monitor also uses an LGW OLED panel underneath with a bit of an anti-reflective coating, so it is not nearly as reflective as some LG OLED TVs or QD OLEDs, but it is not completely matte, so you still want to avoid very bright light sources right behind you. The panel itself is flat, which I also think is the right choice for a 27-inch monitor. But let's talk numbers, and for testing, I used Portrait Display's Kalman software combined with the Video Forge Pro 8K. And when you look at the default setting of this monitor, which is the game mode, you can instantly notice it doesn't really look quite right. It has a very obvious blue tone to it, which you can also see from this graph as well. But if you set it to standard mode, it will look much better. A gray balance is great in this setting, and the color temperature is a much more reasonable 6250. Contrast is practically infinite, of course, since all OLED panels turn off their pixels completely when displaying black color. The color gamut of that standard mode is about 97% of P3, which is what you would usually expect from these panels, and that means that if you calibrate it well, this monitor can be great for proper color accurate work. But it is actually calibrated really well out of the box. Testing a very large number of colors, the average delta E was only 1.23, with the worst result landing at 2.51. And this is a great result, and it means that you can easily use it for color accurate things right away, so right out of the box. I just think it's a shame that they shipped this monitor in that game mode instead of just setting it to this practically perfect standard mode as default. In terms of brightness, you get about 430 nits in SDR mode. In larger window sizes, that does drop a bit, which is unavoidable with OLED panels, but it also means that you can see those brightness shifts in your display if you go from a smaller to a larger white window and vice versa. So Sony added an ABL setting that limits the brightness to about 260 nits and avoids these brightness shifts. So you can see if you prefer having this setting enabled or not. It did pretty well in sRGB mode too, and I noticed a somewhat larger deviation on bright yellow that's slightly too bright, but regardless, I still think the result is more than good enough for doing some color accurate work. The FPS Pro and the FPS Pro Plus modes are very interesting to test because they're supposed to improve your visibility in certain fast-paced games by highlighting colors that are mostly used for enemy outlines, like in Valorant, for example. So you can actually see those outlines stand out a bit more while gaming. And it is basically an extra color profile, so let's see what it does when we put it through the test. And as you can see here, the FPS Pro Plus mode makes reds stand out a lot more while muting everything else and also adding a bit of a cool tone. While the regular FPS Pro mode makes reds and blues a bit brighter while muting green and yellow a bit. So it might be worth playing around with these settings to see if you like them or not and if they will help you or not. Just make sure that you use the standard mode outside of games because these pro modes add some extra sharpness that might be very okay in gaming, but are quite uncomfortable to look at in other Windows applications. In HDR mode, the default setting is Display HDR, and that is basically perfectly calibrated as well. Grayscale tracking is great, and the average color deviation is only 1.4 delta E, making this one of the best results I've seen so far. The maximum is always a little bit higher here in HDR because a perfectly accurate HDR assumes a wider color gamut than any consumer monitor can actually display at the moment, but colors in range are displayed accurately. And even when running the color match test, which specifically tests some of the hardest colors to reproduce, like certain skin tones, the Sony M10S did very well. An average of 3.7 here is a good, if not a great result. So the default HDR profile is the right one for color accuracy, but it doesn't have the highest peak brightness. So it is essentially a Display HDR 400 profile with its brightness limited to 435 nits. Now you can swap it to Cinema HDR, which hits a peak brightness of 727 nits, or Game HDR that goes over 1250 nits, but that will oversaturate your colors a little bit. So you can give all three a go and then see which one you like the most. If you mostly care about gaming, an OLED panel is a very good option because OLED panels have near instant response times and no significant overshoot. But experiencing an OLED at 480 Hz refresh rate is a clear step up in terms of speed and moving image quality. And I cannot really show you how that looks like in a 30 FPS YouTube video, but after using a 240 Hz QD OLED for the last couple of months, the difference of a 480 Hz screen is very noticeable, or at least in games where you can hit those sorts of frame rates. And I think it is very important to think about the games that you want to play and whether you will benefit from this sort of refresh rate, because you can also get a 32-inch 4K 240 Hz monitor for the same price or even less. And while this one will offer you some extra speed, a larger 32-inch 4K model will offer you more immersion. Now you do get G-Sync support, which is nice to have for games that run a bit slower, but the target audience for this monitor are people that regularly play at or near that 480 Hz mark, and that will actually benefit from having a bit more of a, let's say, competitive edge. So it really depends on your own use case and the types of games that you like to play. This monitor did set a new record for my latency test, taking the lead with more than a millisecond of difference. And that might not be something that most people will notice, but it is a nice stat for anyone who is extremely competitive. And it is a significant reduction when comparing end-to-end latency result in the sub 10 millisecond range. But just like every other OLED monitor, this one also comes with a little bit of a flicker that is inherent to all OLED displays. So it has a very small brightness dip in every refresh cycle, and this is something that most users will actually never ever notice or have to worry about, but there is a very small group of people that are more sensitive to this flicker and might find all OLED panels uncomfortable to look at. And even though a 480 Hz display is way less likely to bother anyone than a 60 Hz or a 120 Hz TV, there is still a chance that some people might notice it and it might cause discomfort. But for most people, that is not going to be an issue. Since this is an OLED panel, the viewing angles are great and there is no such thing as backlight bleed. And the only thing that should really be considered when it comes to any OLED technology is burn-in. Now, Sony offers a 3-year-long warranty that specifically mentions burn-in coverage, which is nowadays becoming a standard for OLED panels, but it is still something to think about after that warranty expires. Now, when it comes to the price, it actually really varies depending on where you live. So here in the Netherlands, for example, you will have to set aside 1,200 euros for this monitor, which is a lot of money. And keep in mind, both LG and ASUS have models that are using the exact same panel, but will cost you less. So you really have to ask yourself if you want to pay more for the features that Sony is offering here. In the US, however, the situation is the other way around. So you can get this model for $880, while the LG is $960 and the ASUS $1,000. And then, assuming you decided that a 27-inch 1440p 480 Hz monitor is what you really want, Sony here makes the most sense. And I do think that overall they did a very good job with this monitor. The overall experience is fantastic, the image quality is top tier, the gaming performance is excellent, the latency is great, it is basically as fast as money can buy, it is calibrated really well both in SDR and HDR, and it has one of the best stands, if not the best stand on the market. It is just set to the wrong profile by default, which is a really easy fix. So again, if you decided to get a fast 27-inch Quad HD monitor and you happen to find this one for a very nice price in your region, it is a very easy recommendation. Get it. That's all I had for today, but before I go, let's check out the sponsor of this video. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching and staying to the end of this video. I really hope you liked it and it was helpful, at least a bit. If you want to see more content like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!